Hello and welcome back everyone. I'm back from my holiday and loved visiting Vietnam for the first time. Thank you for all your comments, some of you suggesting what to do in Vietnam. I loved hiking in a relatively cooler region of Sapa particularly. In this video I just want to have a quick look at the general stock market with a bit of a warning that perhaps things are somewhat overvalued. Looking at the daily cycle, we are 23 days into this daily cycle. Usually these daily cycles last for about a couple of months, so we're pretty close to some sort of a midpoint. So I would expect that anytime within a week or so we might actually see the stock market turn around down into the daily cycle low, and eventually, whether it's going to be at the end of the ongoing daily cycle or maybe at the end of one more daily cycle, we are going to see an intermediate cycle low as well. After all, the ongoing intermediate cycle is already 128 days long. Usually these cycles last for around a half a year. This time we might actually see a longer than usual intermediate cycle because some of the previous ones were pretty short. So to balance out the average duration back to that half a year or so, again, we might see a bit of an extended intermediate cycle this time. In either case though, even if this intermediate cycle turns out to be a relatively long one, perhaps it's not a great idea to jump in if you don't have any positions right now after 128 days from the start of this intermediate cycle. What I mean is it's perhaps somewhat late to jump in. I've actually started building short position on S&P and Nasdaq, but with just some minimal tiny positions with some play money. After all, S&P is pretty high above its 200-day moving average. We see it's nearly 13% above its 200-day moving average. And zooming back into this period after the pandemic, some of these relatively significant highs came with 15 to 16, sometimes only 12 to 11%, and even 10% above the 200-day moving average. So if this extends up to say 15 or 16%, as it did in 2021, that might actually test this intermediate cycle high from April last year. But eventually, relatively soon, we are again going to turn back down into the end of the daily cycle, which might also end up being an intermediate cycle low as well. Or another scenario, as I mentioned, is a short-term drop into the daily cycle low, a bit of a bounce into one more daily cycle rally, followed by a drop into that intermediate cycle low. Next, let's have a look at the Optimism index, and it's above 80. It's been above 80 for perhaps a couple of weeks already. And personally, I wouldn't buy the market when the optimism is so high. While yes, just after the pandemic in late 2020, early 2021, we have seen this optimism index stay above 80 for quite a while, perhaps several months, while the stock market was continuing to go higher and higher. Still, on the longer term picture, it isn't often that this optimism index gets as high as 80, and usually it does show some excessive optimism, excessive greed, and of course overvaluation. Looking at slightly longer history going back to middle of 2016, again, it's not often that the optimism index even reaches above the level of 80. Over here, all through 2016, 17, 18, and 19, we only see 3 instances. Each of these don't really last that well. Perhaps a month over here just before the pandemic drop. And again, each of these instances came relatively close to the intermediate cycle tops. Perhaps 2 to 3 weeks before those intermediate cycle tops. So as I've just mentioned, there is some resistance over here around 46.30. That's from April last year, intermediate cycle high. So even if the stock market continues rallying higher for say one more week, there is a lot of risk right now of dropping down into the intermediate cycle low, perhaps over the next 1 or 2 months. After all, the ongoing intermediate cycle is again 18 bars. This is weekly bars. That's 18 weeks into the intermediate cycle. Usually these last for around half a year. Half a year, that's around 26 weeks. So 18 weeks in, that's generally time to control greed. Control greed and look for a better buying opportunity. Talking of wonderful buying opportunities in juniors in metals, while gold and silver We're going to talk about gold and silver in an upcoming video, while gold and silver are ready to rally over the next couple of months. Some of these juniors might actually provide you with that additional torque, additional momentum upwards during continuation of this bull rally in precious metals. For more details, join us at myfinanceteacher.org. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.